All right, joining us now with more, Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Thanks for joining us today, Bill.
Thanks, always a pleasure.
I want to react to a post on social media that Trump made only moments ago. It's unlikely you may have caught it. Trump just posted that a meeting with U.S. defense contractors at the White House has just concluded, and he said that those companies have agreed to quadruple, that's right, quadruple production of the exquisite class weaponry, and that we want to reach as rapidly as possible the highest levels of quantity. He says expansion began prior to the war. I'm going to go forward here to say they've agreed to another meeting in 2 months' time. He said, in the middle of this tweet, if I want to draw your eye there, we have a virtually unlimited supply of medium and upper medium grade munitions, which we are using as an example in Iran, and we used previously in Venezuela. Bill, there's a lot to unbundle there in this tweet. But obviously there's concern at some level, if you're holding a meeting like this, that you've got enough ammunition to last as long as this war needs to last. No supply is unlimited, though Trump claims that this is. What do you make of that meeting and what's come of it?
Well, I think it's certainly increasing the production of key munitions is very important. The U.S. is embroiled in a war in Ukraine by supporting the Ukrainians, providing munitions there. Air defense missiles particularly are in short supply. We've been using a significant number of air defense missiles in this conflict with Iran right now. We remember the war with the Houthis. Both ground-based and ship-based air defense missiles were expended significantly. Then you had with the strikes last summer, you had those large bunker busters. They used, I believe, 2/3 of the stocks of those. There's not a lot. So yeah, anytime you're in a war, and then also, there's a ramp up in China. So, to oppose a potential Chinese invasion in Taiwan. So the U.S. is as a active globally, you have to have and you're embroiled in multiple conflicts and preparing for one. You certainly have to make far more munitions than we have been. I think this has been one of the critical weaknesses in U.S. defense policy, we just haven't been building weapon systems like we need to in the quantities that we need to.
Okay, fair on that, but if you're only 7 days into a conflict which White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said only a couple of hours ago is on track for its 4 to 6 week timeline, then why are you calling an emergency meeting of U.S. defense contractors unless there are signals this could be a more drawn-out affair?
I do think this may indicate that the affair may be drawn out longer, although it's difficult to judge President Trump. And, I look at the war against the Houthis, right, the last year. That was supposed to be a 6-month operation. He stopped it after 1 month because he was not happy with the outcome. So he likes his conflict shorter rather than longer. Remember, he ran on a platform of no new wars. Now, I would argue this isn't a new war. We've been at war with Iran for years, if not decades. It's just a matter of, how hot the war is. But I think it's no secret that the U.S., particularly after the war with the Houthis and the 12-day war where the Iranians were launching missile after missile at Israel and U.S. allies, that we were short on these systems. Again, you have Ukraine that is taking up space. We use the Patriot missile systems there. They're being used in the Middle East. We're preparing, for a potential war in the Pacific. So these systems are strained. I would much rather see this than what we've seen over the last several years, particularly under the Biden administration, was pretending that our depleted stockpiles were not an issue.
And Bill, if I can pivot for a second, what do you make of reports that the CIA might be backing Kurds to become involved in this conflict, particularly because the U.S. so far is not committing to any boots on the ground? So if the Kurds become involved in this conflict, certainly at a military level on the ground, how might that change the equation here? And if I could add to that, what is the history when the U.S. backs the Kurds in conflicts in the Middle East?
Well, I'm glad you asked that second question. It's been a questionable result. We backed them in Iraq. Look, no one's going to say Iraq was a success. In Syria, we backed the Kurds. We just withdrew our support from them. Backing the Kurds causes problems with Turkey, and particularly the Kurds that we've picked, particularly in Syria, was the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party. This is a Marxist terrorist organization. that is listed by the U.S. as a foreign terrorist organization, and we ironically relabeled them the Syrian Democratic Forces, Marxist terrorist, or anything but democratic. The Turks did not like this, and they sabotaged our efforts. They supported basically Al Qaeda's branch in Syria to take over the country, and we wound up abandoning those Kurds. The PJAK, one of the groups that's said to be fighting against the Iranian regime right now, they are reported to have sent thousands of fighters into northern Iran. The problem with this group is that it's going to anger the Turks, right? They are going to have limited effect on the peripheries. This is not the group that's going to march into Tehran and take over the country and oust the government. It could only have limited impact effects. And by the way, they're armed to the teeth already. The U.S. needs to be looking at the Iranian opposition groups and figuring out how to, if the goal is to overthrow the regime, and if you want to ensure Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles pointed at our allies and at the West, that's the only way to ensure this. Then you need to go beyond groups like the Kurds. It seems like the Kurds are our default, and it's a bad default policy.
And there has been so much flirtation with whether or not regime change was, in fact, the very reason for this military operation from the beginning. President Trump just today putting out a missive saying, we will find an acceptable leader, which suggests leadership was at the forefront of this initiative. Bill Roggio, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.